In today's video, we follow Sophia, a young woman navigating the challenging journey of rebuilding her life after a devastating breakup. As she faces the emotional scars left by her past, Sophia begins to find strength in unexpected places. From the support of her close-knit community in Oakwood to her own personal transformation, this is a story of healing, resilience, and the power of letting go. Sophia learns that true healing comes not only from facing the past, but also from embracing the opportunities for growth and connection that life offers. Before we dive into this gripping tale of love, loss, and self-discovery, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this uplifting story of strength and transformation, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of the inspiring stories coming your way. Dr. John Adams was the pride of Oakwood, a picturesque town nestled in the rolling hills of the American Midwest. From the moment he was born, his life seemed predestined for success. The youngest of 3 children in the prestigious Adams family, John had always stood out, not just because of his achievements, but because of his remarkable character. The Adams family was revered in Oakwood. Richard Adams, John's father, was a towering figure both in stature and influence. He had built Adams Pharmaceuticals from a modest local operation into a national powerhouse, revolutionizing the medical field with groundbreaking drugs. The family's wealth and status were evident in their sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. The mansion, surrounded by manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, was a symbol of generations of refinement and success. Inside, its halls were adorned with fine art, antique furniture, and an air of grandeur that spoke to the family's legacy. However, for John, growing up in this world of privilege was not without its challenges. Richard was a man of immense expectations, whose rare words of approval carried more weight than volumes of praise from others. He instilled in John a sense of duty to the family name, to their legacy, and to the community that looked up to them. Evelyn Adams, John's mother, provided a softer balance. A woman of grace and deep faith, she ensured her children were raised with strong Christian values and an awareness of the needs of others. As a boy, John had excelled in every way. He was the star of his school, not just academically, but socially. Teachers praised his intelligence and leadership, while classmates gravitated to his natural charisma and kindness. John's compassion set him apart. Whether it was helping a struggling classmate with homework or visiting the elderly at the local nursing home, he showed an empathy that belied his privileged upbringing. When it came time for college, John's choice of medicine surprised many, including his family. While his siblings had pursued careers in law and business to align with the family's expectations, John's passion for helping others drove him toward becoming a doctor. After earning a spot at one of the nation's top universities and excelling through medical school, John was poised for a career in any prestigious hospital he chose. But he made another surprising decision, one that would define his character even further. John returned to Oakwood to establish his practice, a choice that both delighted and mystified the townspeople. In a community where many sought to escape small-town life, John's return was seen as a selfless act. The local paper ran a glowing feature, proclaiming him Oakwood's golden boy. His modest clinic quickly became the beating heart of the town. However, despite his accolades and the respect he garnered, John's life felt incomplete. His days were consumed by his work, which, while fulfilling, left little time for meaningful connections. His relationships with women had been fleeting, and his social life remained mostly confined to community events that felt more like obligations than opportunities for genuine companionship. John's mother, Evelyn, worried for her son. She often encouraged him to meet women from respected families in town, subtly hinting at daughters of her church friends or other prominent families. But while John nodded and smiled during these conversations, he felt no urgency to settle for someone merely to meet expectations. Underneath his polished exterior was a man yearning for something authentic, a connection that went beyond social standing or appearances. He wanted a partner who saw the world the way he did, through the lens of compassion and purpose. On the other side of this narrative was Sophia Jackson, whose life could not have been more different from John's. Sophia had grown up in the heart of the city, where opportunities were scarce, and every day felt like a battle for survival. A single mother of 5, she had learned to juggle her roles with an extraordinary sense of grace and resilience. Her life was a delicate balance of raising her children, working multiple jobs, and keeping her family afloat in the face of endless challenges. Sophia's strength came from necessity. When her husband left, abandoning her with 5 children and no financial support, she had no choice but to step up. She became both mother and father, protector and provider. Despite the hardship, Sophia instilled in her children the values of hard work, kindness, and hope. She wanted them to believe in a brighter future, even if her own life had been marred by disappointment. The decision to move to Oakwood was a leap of faith. Sophia longed to give her children a fresh start, a life away from the chaos of the city and the constant struggles that had defined their existence. Oakwood, with its quiet streets, good schools, and sense of community, seemed like the perfect place for a new beginning. But settling into this idyllic town wasn't easy. From the moment they arrived, Sophia could feel the weight of being an outsider. The whispers, the sidelong glances, and the thinly veiled judgment were constant reminders that she and her children were not yet part of Oakwood's close-knit fabric. Sophia didn't let it deter her. She was determined to carve out a life for her family, no matter how hard she had to work or how much skepticism she faced. She found a small house on the outskirts of town and set about creating a home for her children, filling it with warmth and laughter, even as she stretched every dollar to make ends meet. For Sophia, every day was a test of endurance. She juggled work, her children's needs, and the challenge of navigating a new town where she felt both hopeful and unwelcome. But her quiet strength and unwavering love for her family became the foundation of her resolve. Little did Sophia know that her life was about to intersect with someone who would change everything. On a seemingly ordinary morning, Sophia stepped into John Adams' clinic with her sick son, Devon. That chance encounter, born out of desperation, would set the stage for a story neither of them could have predicted. As Sophia and her children stood in the waiting room of John's clinic, her presence caught the attention of not just the staff, but also John himself. Her strength and grace were apparent, even in the way she carried herself under the weight of worry. John, though accustomed to treating patients from all walks of life, found himself unexpectedly intrigued by this woman who exuded resilience and determination. Neither of them could have foreseen the profound impact they would have on each other's lives. For Sophia, meeting John would mark the beginning of a love she never thought possible. For John, it was a reminder that the life he yearned for, the one filled with connection and authenticity, was finally within reach. Their paths, so different yet intertwined by fate, were about to converge in ways that would challenge everything they had ever known. The morning sun streamed through the windows of John Adams' clinic, casting a warm glow over the neatly organized space. It was a typical day for John, a full schedule of appointments, a desk piled high with paperwork, and a waiting room bustling with patients. Despite the demands, John loved his work. The clinic, though modest compared to his family's grand estate, was a reflection of his values, simple, welcoming, and focused on helping others. On this particular day, his routine was interrupted by the arrival of Sophia Jackson and her children. Sophia entered the clinic with a mix of determination and exhaustion. Her son Devon, pale and lethargic, leaned against her side, his small body weighed down by the fever that had plagued him for days. The rest of her children trailed behind, their wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Sophia hesitated for a moment before approaching the receptionist's desk. "I'm sorry to come in without an appointment," she said softly, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "But my son is sick, and I didn't know where else to go." John's nurse, Marge, glanced at the group before nodding. Marge had a sixth sense of urgency, and she could see that this was a case that required immediate attention. "Let me check with Dr. Adams," she said before disappearing down the hallway. When Marge knocked on John's office door, he was mid-bite into a sandwich, trying to squeeze in a quick lunch between patients. "Dr. Adams," Marge said, her tone calm but firm, "there's a woman here with her children. One of them is sick, and she says it's urgent." John set down his sandwich, concern flickering across his face. Of course, show them in. A few moments later, the door to his office opened, and Sophia stepped inside, guiding Devon gently toward the chair by John's desk. Her other children stayed close to the wall, their quiet presence filling the room with a mix of curiosity and unease. John stood, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm Dr. Adams. Please, have a seat." Sophia remained standing, her protective instincts keeping her on edge. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I'm Sophia Jackson, and this is my son Devon. He's been running a fever for days, coughing non-stop. I didn't know where else to go." John nodded, his gaze shifting to Devon. "You came to the right place. Let's take a look." He led Devon into the examination room, Sophia close behind. As John conducted a thorough exam, he noted the crackling sound in the boy's lungs, the flush of fever on his cheeks, and the exhaustion in his eyes. It didn't take long for him to diagnose a respiratory infection, likely pneumonia. "It's pneumonia," John said gently, meeting Sophia's anxious gaze. "But we caught it early, and with the right antibiotics, he'll be fine." Relief flooded Sophia's features, her shoulders sagging as the weight of her worry began to lift. "Thank you, Dr. Adams. I was so scared." "You did the right thing by bringing him here," John replied. "I'll write a prescription, and you can pick it up at the pharmacy down the street. If you have any trouble, let me know." Sophia nodded, gratitude evident in her voice. "Thank you, truly." As John walked them back to the waiting room, his mind lingered on Sophia. There was something about her presence, her quiet strength, and her unwavering focus on her children that struck a chord with him. After they left, John returned to his desk, but he couldn't shake the image of Sophia standing in his office, her eyes filled with worry and determination. It wasn't just her beauty that had caught his attention, it was the way she carried herself, with a grace that belied the hardships she had clearly endured. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but thoughts of Sophia remained at the edges of John's mind. He had met many patients over the years, each with their own struggles, but there was something about her that stirred a part of him he hadn't felt in a long time. Sophia, meanwhile, was equally unsettled. She had been bracing herself for judgment when she entered the clinic, but Dr. Adams had shown her nothing but kindness and professionalism. She couldn't help but be struck by the way he had treated Devon with patience and genuine care. As she gathered her children and walked home, Sophia found herself replaying their interaction. It had been years since she'd felt such a spark of hope, and though she tried to push it aside, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder what it might mean. A week later, Sophia returned to the clinic for Devon's follow-up appointment. This time, Devon was noticeably better, his fever gone and his energy restored. Sophia's relief was palpable, and she couldn't stop smiling as John examined her son. "You've made a full recovery, Devon," John said with a smile, ruffling the boy's hair. "Good job taking your medicine." Devon grinned, shy but proud. "Thanks, Dr. Adams." As Sophia helped her son off the examination table, John hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Sophia," he began, his tone careful, "if you're free sometime, maybe we could grab a coffee. I'd like to hear more about how you and your family are settling in." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. But as she looked at John, she saw only sincerity in his expression. "I'd like that," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. They agreed to meet at the local coffee shop the next morning, and as Sophia left the clinic with her children in tow, John felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, John arrived at the coffee shop early, his nerves betraying how much he was looking forward to the meeting. He had spent the night wondering how to approach the conversation, determined not to seem intrusive, but eager to learn more about the woman who had so unexpectedly captured his attention. When Sophia arrived, she looked different, more relaxed, more comfortable in her surroundings. Her simple dress and loose hair framed her face beautifully, and John stood to greet her, his smile warm and genuine. The conversation started slowly, with small talk about Devon's recovery and Sophia's initial impressions of Oakwood. But as the minutes passed, the initial awkwardness melted away, replaced by an easy, natural connection. Sophia opened up about her life in the city, the struggles she had faced as a single mother, the sacrifices she had made for her children, and the hope that had driven her to Oakwood. Her voice wavered at times, but there was no mistaking the strength beneath her words. John, in turn, shared his own story, his privileged upbringing, the pressures of his family's expectations, and the loneliness that often accompanied his success. He spoke with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show, and Sophia listened intently, her empathy evident in her eyes. By the time they finished their coffee, hours had passed, and both were reluctant to leave. "I enjoyed this," John said as they stood to go. "I hope we can do it again sometime." Sophia smiled, a warmth in her expression that made John's heart skip a beat. "I'd like that." As she walked away, John watched her go, feeling a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. Little did they know, their connection was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge them in ways they couldn't yet imagine, but also bring them a love that would change everything. The days following their coffee shop meeting passed in a haze for both John and Sophia, each lost in thoughts of the other. For John, the encounter had been a revelation, a glimpse of something his life had been missing. Sophia, with her strength and resilience, had stirred feelings in him that he hadn't felt in years. For Sophia, the connection felt like an unexpected gift, though she couldn't help but feel cautious. She had long since learned that life rarely offered her anything without a cost. John didn't wait long to reach out. A few days later, he stopped by Sophia's house under the pretense of checking on Devon. When she opened the door, he was greeted by the sight of Sophia balancing a toddler on her hip, while the older children worked on homework around the kitchen table. The house was modest, but filled with warmth, the walls adorned with hand-drawn pictures and the faint smell of something baking in the oven. "Dr. Adams," Sophia said, surprised but pleased. "What brings you here?" "Call me John," he said with a smile. "I just wanted to see how Devon was doing. Thought I'd save you a trip to the clinic." Devon appeared at the doorway, grinning. "I'm fine now, Doctor. John. Mom's been making me take all my medicine, even the gross one." John laughed. "Sounds like your mom knows what she's doing." Sophia stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "You caught us in the middle of homework time, but you're welcome to stay for a bit if you don't mind the chaos." The chaos she spoke of was evident but endearing. The youngest children played with building blocks on the living room floor, while the older ones worked diligently on school assignments. Sophia moved seamlessly between them, offering help with a math problem here and mediating a disagreement there. John watched her with admiration, struck again by her quiet strength. Their conversation was easy, punctuated by laughter and the occasional interruption from one of the children. John learned more about Sophia's life, her reasons for coming to Oakwood, her dreams for her children, and the struggles she faced as an outsider in the town. When he finally left, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. As John walked to his car, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. "We'll come back?" Their connection deepened over the next few weeks. John began finding reasons to see Sophia more often, whether it was inviting her to lunch or offering to help with tasks around the house. Each visit brought them closer, and Sophia found herself letting her guard down, something she hadn't done in a long time. But their growing relationship did not go unnoticed. In a town as small as Oakwood, gossip spread quickly. Whispers of John Adams, the town's golden boy, spending time with Sophia Jackson, the single mother of 5, began circulating. "I heard she's just using him," one woman said to her friend during their weekly lunch at the Oakwood Country Club. "Can you blame her?" The friend replied. "A man like John Adams? He's practically a lottery ticket." The judgment wasn't confined to whispers. At the grocery store, Sophia felt the weight of stares as she shopped with her children. At school events, the other parents kept their distance, their smiles polite but thin. For John, the disapproval was more subtle but no less painful. Longtime friends became distant, their conversations awkward and stilted. Even his parents began to voice their concerns. One evening, during their usual family dinner at the Adams estate, the tension came to a head. "I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time with Sophia Jackson," Richard said, his tone casual but his gaze sharp. John set down his fork, meeting his father's eyes. "I have. She's a wonderful woman, and I enjoy her company." Richard's expression hardened. "She's also a single mother with 5 children. Do you think that's a suitable match for you?" Richard, Evelyn interjected, her voice soft but firm. This isn't the time. No, John said, his voice steady. Let's talk about it. I respect Sophia deeply. She's hard-working, kind, and one of the strongest people I've ever met. If you can't see that, maybe you should meet her yourself instead of passing judgment. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Evelyn, sensing the rising tension, placed a hand on her husband's arm. John, we just want what's best for you. That's all. I know you do, Mom, John said, his tone softening as he turned to her. But what's best for me is someone who makes me happy, and Sophia does that. The conversation ended there, but the unease lingered. Despite the growing resistance from the town and his own family, John refused to distance himself from Sophia. Instead, he became even more determined to stand by her side. One Saturday afternoon, he invited her and the children to join him for a picnic at the riverbank, one of Oakwood's most scenic spots. Sophia hesitated at first, worried about how their presence might be perceived, but John's insistence won her over. The day turned out to be a rare moment of joy. The children splashed in the shallow water, their laughter ringing through the air. John showed Devon how to skip stones, and Jasmine, the oldest, surprised him with her quick wit and dry humor. For Sophia, watching John interact with her children was a revelation. He wasn't just kind to them, he genuinely cared. It was in the way he knelt to talk to the youngest at eye level, the way he encouraged Devon's curiosity, and the way he listened when Jasmine spoke, treating her opinions with respect. As the sun began to set, John and Sophia sat side by side on a blanket, watching the children chase fireflies. This is nice, Sophia said softly, her gaze on her children. It is, John agreed. He hesitated before adding, Sophia, I want you to know that I care about you, about all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. Sophia turned to him, her eyes searching his face. John, this isn't easy. The town, your family, I don't want to be the reason you lose people in your life. You're not, John said firmly. If someone can't accept you, then they don't really know me because you're becoming a part of my life, Sophia. A part I don't want to lose. Sophia's heart swelled at his words, but the lingering fear of rejection kept her from fully embracing the moment. I just don't want you to regret this. John reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. I won't. For the first time, Sophia allowed herself to believe him. But even as their bond deepened, the challenges ahead grew more daunting. The whispers in town became louder, and the disapproval from John's father remained unyielding. Sophia found herself questioning whether their love could withstand the weight of so much judgment. Little did they know, the hardest trials were yet to come. John and Sophia's relationship, once private and tentative, was becoming more visible in Oakwood. What had begun as quiet visits and shared moments at the coffee shop evolved into public outings, family picnics, walks through town, and Sunday services at the local church. Each step they took together brought them closer, but also placed them under greater scrutiny. For Sophia, the stares and whispered judgments from townsfolk were difficult to endure. Though she tried to shield her children from the negativity, there were moments when even their innocence couldn't protect them from the weight of Oakwood's expectations. One such moment came during a playground visit. Sophia had taken her younger children to the park for a break from their schoolwork, eager to give them time to play and unwind. At first, everything was peaceful, but then the kids climbed the jungle gym, raced down slides, and laughed together. But Sophia couldn't help but notice the other parents watching her from the benches, their conversations hushed and their expressions guarded. Isn't that the woman John Adams has been seeing? One mother murmured. She has 5 kids, another replied, her tone dripping with disdain. I don't know what he's thinking. Sophia bit the inside of her cheek, willing herself to ignore them. She had heard it all before, remarks about her family, her past, and her relationship with John. But hearing it at the park, in a place meant for laughter and innocence, stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. The final blow came when her son Devon ran up to join a group of boys playing soccer. As he asked to join their game, one boy sneered, "We don't play with people like you." Sophia rose from her seat, her heart breaking as she saw Devon's shoulders slump. She was about to intervene when Devon turned and walked back to her. His eyes filled with tears he was too proud to let fall. "It's okay, Mom," he said quietly, though his voice trembled. Sophia knelt down, pulling him into a hug. "No, it's not," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. When they returned home that evening, Sophia's resolve to protect her children hardened. She couldn't let them face this kind of rejection alone, and she knew she couldn't face it alone either. Bookmark. John had noticed Sophia's growing unease in recent weeks. While she tried to hide it, he could see the toll that Oakwood's judgment was taking on her. One evening, after dinner with Sophia and her children, John asked her to step outside with him. The air was cool, and the sky was dotted with stars as they sat together on the porch steps. "Sophia," John began gently, "I can see this is weighing on you. Talk to me, please." Sophia sighed, resting her hands in her lap. "It's not just about me, John. It's the kids. Devin was turned away from a game at the park today because of who he is and because of who I am. Jasmine barely speaks about school anymore, and I know it's because she feels like an outsider." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "I've faced this kind of thing my whole life. I know how to deal with it, but they don't, and I don't know how to make it better for them." John reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do it alone, Sophia. I'm here, for you and for them. We'll face this together." "I'm scared, John," she admitted, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm scared of what this is doing to them. To us." John leaned closer, his voice firm but filled with love. "I know it's hard, and I know it feels impossible right now. But we can't let them win, Sophia. The people who judge us don't define us. We define ourselves, and we define this family, together." Sophia looked at him, her tears drying as determination replaced her fear. "You really believe that?" "I do," John said, "because I believe in you. In us." The turning point came one Saturday afternoon at a town meeting. Oakwood's community gatherings were usually uneventful, a mix of local updates, announcements, and mild debates over park maintenance or school funding. But this meeting was different. As John and Sophia entered the town hall together, the room fell silent. Whispers rippled through the crowd, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but midway through, a man named Bill Carter stood up to speak. Bill, a longtime resident with deep ties to the town, had never hidden his disapproval of Sophia's presence in Oakwood. "I want to talk about maintaining the traditions of this town," Bill said, his voice loud and authoritative. "Oakwood has always been a place of values, of standards. But lately, it seems like we're losing sight of what makes this community great. We've got newcomers who don't share our way of life, trying to change things that don't need changing." Though he didn't say Sophia's name, everyone in the room knew who he was talking about. John stood, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Bill, if you have something to say it plainly." Bill turned to him, his expression defiant. "Fine, I'll say it. This town doesn't need people who don't belong here, people who don't understand our traditions." John's face hardened, but his voice remained steady. "And who gets to decide who belongs, Bill? You? The people in this room? Because I see a family that works hard, that contributes to this community, and that deserves the same respect as anyone else here." The room grew quieter, the tension palpable. Bill scoffed. "You're blinded, John. You don't see what the rest of us see." "You're right," John shot back, his voice rising. "I see a woman who raised 5 incredible kids on her own. I see someone who's stronger and more compassionate than most people I know. And I see a town that claims to value community while turning its back on people who want to be part of it." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. Evelyn Adams, seated near the front, stood and turned to address the room. "John's right," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This town is better when we come together, not when we divide ourselves. Sophia and her family are part of Oakwood now, and we should welcome them, not push them away." Her words carried weight, and the room grew still. Even Richard Adams, who had remained silent, seemed to consider them. Bill sat down, his face flushed with anger, but he didn't say another word. The days that followed the meeting marked a subtle but significant shift. While not everyone in town embraced Sophia and her family, there were glimmers of change. Neighbors who had once been distant began offering warm greetings. A few parents reached out to schedule playdates. For John and Sophia, the fight was far from over, but they had taken a crucial step. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Sophia looked at John and smiled. "You didn't have to stand up for me like that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," John replied. "Because we're in this together. Always." As their children laughed and shared stories from their day, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Oakwood wasn't perfect, but it was home. And with John by her side, she knew they could weather any storm. The fallout from the town meeting rippled through Oakwood as a stone dropped into still water. While Bill Carter's remarks highlighted the lingering resistance to Sophia and her family, the support John and Evelyn showed in response planted the seeds for change. Those seeds, however, would take time to grow. For weeks, the air in Oakwood felt charged with the weight of unspoken opinions. At church, at the market, and even during casual encounters on the street, there was an unmissable shift in how people interacted with John and Sophia. Some approached with hesitant smiles, making small talk where there had once been silence. Others remained cool and distant, their disapproval etched into every glance. Sophia, for her part, focused on what she could control. She continued to immerse herself in community life, volunteering at the school, attending town events, and taking every opportunity to show that she and her family were not just visitors to Oakwood, but a permanent part of its fabric. One of those opportunities came when the Oakwood Community Center announced plans for a charity fundraiser. The event, intended to raise money for new playground equipment and after-school programs, included a bake sale, an auction, and a variety of games for the children. Sophia decided to volunteer, signing up to organize the bake sale and contribute her famous peach cobbler, a recipe passed down from her grandmother. The morning of the fundraiser dawned bright and sunny. Sophia arrived at the community center early, carrying trays of baked goods and accompanied by her children, who were eager to help. Jasmine took charge of setting up the table, arranging cookies, brownies, and pies with artistic precision, while Devon organized the donation jars. As other volunteers began to arrive, Sophia was met with mixed reactions. Some greeted her warmly, offering compliments on her baking. Others nodded politely before moving to set up their own booths. It was clear that despite her efforts, there were still barriers to overcome. John arrived mid-morning, bringing coffee for Sophia and the kids. As he helped her arrange a tray of cupcakes, he leaned in and whispered, "You're amazing, you know that?" Sophia smiled, her nerves easing at his words. "I'm just doing what I can. We all are." By the time the fundraiser officially began, the community center was buzzing with activity. Families strolled through the booths, children played games in the outdoor lot, and the scent of freshly baked treats filled the air. Sophia's bake sale table quickly became one of the most popular attractions, drawing praise for its delicious offerings. "This peach cobbler is incredible," one woman exclaimed, holding up her plate for emphasis. Sophia smiled warmly. "Thank you, it's a family recipe." As the day went on, Sophia noticed more people stopping by to chat, not just about the bake sale, but about the community and their shared experiences. One woman, a teacher at the local elementary school, mentioned how much she admired Jasmine's leadership on the basketball team. Another complimented Devon's science project, which had recently been featured in the school's newsletter. With each conversation, Sophia felt the walls around her begin to crumble, piece by piece. The auction, held in the late afternoon, was the highlight of the fundraiser. John had donated a weekend wellness retreat at a nearby spa, a gesture that drew significant bids. Sophia watched from the back of the room as John stood near the auctioneer, his confidence and charisma on full display. "Your husband's quite the catch," a voice said beside her. Sophia turned to see Martha Wilson, the wife of the local hardware store owner. They had exchanged pleasantries in the past, but this was the first time Martha had approached her for a real conversation. "He is," Sophia replied, smiling, "but I think he'd say the same about me." Martha chuckled. "Fair enough. I wanted to tell you I've been watching how you've handled everything since you moved here. You've got more grace than I'd have in your shoes." "Thank you," Sophia said, surprised and touched. "I mean it," Martha continued. "This town isn't always easy, but I think people are starting to see what John sees in you. You've got heart, Sophia, and that's something Oakwood could use more of." As Martha walked away, Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that she hadn't realized she needed to hear. By the end of the day, the fundraiser was declared a resounding success, raising more than enough money for the playground and after-school programs. The bake sale had sold out, the auction had drawn record bids, and the games had left the children exhausted but happy. As the event wound down, Sophia stood with John, watching their children chase each other across the field. Jasmine laughed as Devon tried to tag her, their younger siblings giggling as they joined in. "You did this," John said, his voice full of pride. "We did this," Sophia corrected, leaning into him. The sense of unity and belonging she felt at that moment was something she hadn't dared to hope for when she first arrived in Oakwood. The momentum from the fundraiser carried over into the following weeks. Sophia's peach cobbler became a topic of conversation around town, and she was even asked to share the recipe for the church's annual cookbook. Devon's teachers commended his leadership in the science club, and Jasmine continued to earn accolades for her contributions on and off the basketball court. Even Evelyn Adams, who had always been polite but reserved with Sophia, began to warm to her daughter-in-law. During one of their weekly family dinners, Evelyn pulled Sophia aside and offered her a small smile. "I was wrong about you," Evelyn said quietly. "I thought you were too different from us, that you wouldn't fit. But I see now that you're exactly what this family needed." Sophia blinked back tears, her voice trembling as she replied, "That means more than you know. Thank you." Richard, however, remained stoic. Though he no longer openly voiced his objections, his demeanor toward Sophia and her children was cool at best. Sophia resolved to give him time, knowing that change rarely came easily. As summer began to wane and the first hints of autumn crept into the air, the Adams-Jackson family found themselves more integrated into Oakwood than ever before. Their journey had not been without its struggles, but they had earned their place through resilience, kindness, and an unwavering commitment to one another. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars, John took Sophia's hand and smiled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said. Sophia nodded, her heart full. "We have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Neither would I," John replied. In that quiet moment, with the laughter of their children echoing in the background, they knew they had found something rare and precious. A home, not just in Oakwood, but in each other. Autumn settled into Oakwood like a blanket, the crisp air filling the mornings with a sense of anticipation. The town's pace had slowed, and with the harvest season in full swing, there was an unspoken shift. John and Sophia's life was, for the most part, peaceful and comfortable, in a way they hadn't imagined when they first arrived. But just as the leaves changed color, so too did the dynamics within their family and the town. Not all was as harmonious as it seemed. It began with a simple request. One Thursday afternoon, Sophia was in the middle of preparing dinner when the phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Sophia, I'm hoping you and John can come over for dinner tonight," Evelyn said, her tone warm but guarded. "We're having a few people from church over. It'll be a small gathering, just a chance to catch up before the holidays." Sophia hesitated for a moment. While the invitation was certainly an olive branch, there had been no mention of Richard or his thoughts on their growing closeness. Evelyn, despite her newfound acceptance of Sophia, was still the bridge between them and Richard's more reserved views on their family. "That sounds nice, Evelyn." "We'd love to," Sophia replied, keeping her voice steady. "What time should we be there?" 6 o'clock should be fine, Evelyn said before adding, almost as an afterthought, "And please, bring the kids. Richard's been asking about them." Sophia agreed, but as she hung up the phone, she felt a flicker of unease. Richard's approval had never come easy. It was one thing to see small signs of progress in their interactions, but it was another to face him directly in his own home, surrounded by others. The evening arrived with a crisp breeze that sent the scent of fallen leaves into the air. As John, Sophia, and the children made their way to the Adams house, the atmosphere was calm, yet filled with underlying tension. The kids chatted excitedly in the back seat, oblivious to the weight of the occasion. But for Sophia, the anticipation of walking into Richard's domain made her feel like she was stepping into a carefully set trap, one where every move could be scrutinized. The house was warm and inviting, and the familiar scent of roasting chicken greeted them at the door. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, setting the table, while Richard sat in the living room reading the paper. His greeting was polite but distant as he looked up from his newspaper. "Evening, John. Sophia." His gaze lingered for a moment longer on Sophia, a subtle reminder of his coldness. "It's good to have you all here." Sophia offered a soft smile, willing herself to stay composed. "Thank you, Richard. The kids are looking forward to it." The dinner began with small talk. Evelyn chatted about the upcoming town fair and how she was helping with the decorations. John shared updates about his work at the farm, while the children played with their food, trying to sneak in more dessert than they should. But despite the surface-level civility, Sophia could feel the weight of Richard's gaze on her. It wasn't until after dinner that the conversation turned toward Oakwood's upcoming harvest festival, and the atmosphere shifted. Richard, who had remained relatively quiet, suddenly cleared his throat. "Sophia, I've been meaning to ask you about the fundraiser you organized last month. I heard it went quite well." His voice was neutral, but there was an edge to his words. Sophia paused, not expecting the direct question. She wasn't sure whether this was an attempt at conversation or a subtle criticism, so she answered cautiously. "Yes, it went better than we expected. We raised enough for the playground equipment and the after-school programs. It felt good to contribute to the community." John, sensing the tension, jumped in. Everyone worked hard on it, and it was a real team effort. Sophia did most of the organizing, though. Richard's lips tightened for a moment, as if he were processing something. "Team effort, huh? It's just that I've heard some people are still questioning whether a newcomer should be the one taking charge of something so important. Especially when there are plenty of people in Oakwood who've lived here their whole lives." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. The indirect jab was unmistakable. She'd anticipated some pushback from Richard, but hearing him voice it so openly made her stomach churn. John stiffened next to her, his eyes narrowing. "We've been here for a while now, Richard, and I'd like to think that means something." There was a long silence as everyone at the table exchanged wary glances. The kids, sensing the tension, fell silent, their eyes darting between the adults. Finally, Evelyn, sensing the need to diffuse the situation, spoke up. "I'm sure Richard didn't mean it the way it sounded," she said softly, her voice carrying the tone of a mother trying to calm things down. "Let's not get caught up in old grievances tonight." Sophia, her patience tested, took a deep breath. "I understand, Richard," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But we're not here to take over. We're here to be a part of this town, and if that means working hard to contribute to its future, then I'm going to keep doing just that." John's hand found hers under the table, a silent show of support, but Sophia could feel the tension still hanging in the air. Richard's face remained unreadable as he stared at his plate, but the message had been made clear. The rift between him and Sophia was far from mended. Later that night, as they returned home, the weight of the dinner hung heavy between John and Sophia. The kids had gone to bed, their laughter from earlier still lingering in the halls, but the house felt quieter than usual. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, her thoughts racing. "I thought we were getting somewhere, John. I really did. But every time Richard speaks, it feels like I'm right back at square one." John sighed as he joined her at the table, pulling her into his arms. "I know, it's frustrating, but you've done more than enough to show him who you are. I know he sees it, even if he's not ready to admit it." Sophia leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I just wish it didn't feel like I had to prove myself all over again every time we're together." "I get it," John said softly. "But you're not alone in this. We'll face it together as a family." The days following the dinner were tense, but life in Oakwood continued. The harvest festival approached, and as always, the town buzzed with preparations. Sophia knew she would have to face Richard again, but she refused to let his disapproval control her every move. She was a part of this town now, and no amount of resistance could change that. The festival was held in the town square, with booths selling homemade goods, games for the children, and a parade through the main street. The Adams-Jackson family attended as they had every year. But this time, their presence felt different. They were no longer the newcomers. They were part of the fabric of Oakwood, despite the lingering shadows cast by Richard's coldness. As Sophia walked beside John, hand in hand, she knew there was still work to be done. But she was no longer afraid of what others thought. Oakwood was her home, and she was determined to prove that her place there was earned, not given. The air had turned colder as the days of early autumn drifted into late October, but the bustling energy of Oakwood's Harvest Festival kept the town alive. It was a sharp contrast to the subtle tension that had crept into the lives of John and Sophia. Though the festival was supposed to be a celebration, for Sophia, it was more than that. It was another stage for her to prove herself, not only to Richard, but to the community at large. Every smile she gave, every gesture she made felt like it was under a microscope. But, despite the undercurrent of discomfort, Sophia couldn't deny that there were moments of warmth. The festival was a success, and people who had once only waved politely in passing now stopped to chat. She was no longer just the newcomer. She was a neighbor and a fellow Oakwood citizen. However, as the festival wound down and the weather continued to chill, so too did the interactions between Sophia and Richard. He kept his distance at the event, exchanging only the most necessary pleasantries. Evelyn, always the gracious host, tried to keep things light, chatting with the other townsfolk and letting Richard be as distant as he needed to be. But there was a growing sense that something was being left unresolved. Later that week, John and Sophia found themselves sitting at their kitchen table, each with a cup of coffee in hand, though neither of them seemed to be drinking much. John had spent the afternoon at the farm, and Sophia had been busy catching up on some work for the town's outreach committee. "I don't think it's getting any easier with Richard," Sophia said softly, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "The more I try, the more he pulls away. And I don't understand it. What am I missing?" John sighed, his brows furrowing in frustration. "I don't know, Soph. I really don't. But I do know you're trying, and I can see it. You're not the problem here. It's him." "I don't know," Sophia muttered, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug absently. "It just feels like I'm standing on the edge of something, and I don't know how much longer I can keep balancing on it." John reached across the table and took her hand, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're not alone in this. We're a team, okay? Just because Richard can't see who you are doesn't mean you have to change. Just keep doing what you're doing, and eventually, he'll have to see it." But Sophia couldn't help but feel the strain of the situation. She had been trying so hard to fit into Oakwood, to be a part of something. But the more she tried, the more she felt like she was being tested at every turn. Richard's disapproval wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a constant, unspoken weight on her shoulders, one that threatened to pull her down every time she felt like she was making progress. The following Sunday, after church, John and Sophia decided to attend the Addams family dinner again. This time, Richard was present in a way that felt less guarded, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved. As they sat at the dinner table, Evelyn did her best to keep the conversation flowing. Richard, however, seemed preoccupied. His interactions with Sophia were polite but brief. He avoided eye contact, choosing instead to engage in conversations with others at the table. Sophia couldn't help but feel his aloofness in every word he spoke. After all this time, after all her efforts, it was as if she were invisible to him. Just as the meal was winding down, Richard stood up, excusing himself from the table. "I'm going to step out for a bit. You all enjoy dessert." Evelyn shot him a look of mild concern, but said nothing. The conversation continued, but Sophia found it hard to focus. Her mind kept drifting to Richard. Why couldn't he just accept her? What was it about her that he couldn't see? Later, when they were about to leave, Evelyn pulled Sophia aside in the kitchen. "Sophia, I know this has been hard," she said quietly, as if trying to find the right words. "Richard, he's been through a lot. I think he's just afraid of letting people in. It's not you. It's him." Sophia nodded, but there was a knot in her chest that wouldn't loosen. I don't know how much longer I can keep trying. He won't even look at me. He acts like I don't exist." Evelyn took a deep breath, her expression softening. "I know it's difficult, but sometimes people just need time. And I think Richard needs more time. He's not a bad man, Sophia. He's just been burned before." Sophia felt a pang of guilt mixed with frustration. She understood loss. She understood what it was like to carry a scar. But she also knew that people couldn't hide behind their hurt forever. "I'll try," she said finally, though her words felt hollow. "But I don't know how long I can wait." As autumn deepened into winter, the tension between Sophia and Richard only seemed to grow. Oakwood on the surface was thriving, its streets lined with holiday lights, the local bakery bustling with customers picking up pies and cakes for Thanksgiving dinners. However, for Sophia, it was hard to focus on the beauty of the town when the one person who could make her feel truly accepted continued to shut her out. Her frustrations began to surface in small ways with the kids, moments of quiet retreat when John tried to talk through things. It wasn't that she didn't love him or the kids or Oakwood. She did. She loved all of it. But the more Richard resisted, the more she felt like she was being pulled in two directions, trying to honor her new life and trying to earn the approval of someone who seemed set against her. One afternoon, after an especially difficult conversation with Evelyn, where the latter had once again urged her to be patient, Sophia reached her breaking point. "I can't do this anymore," she said to John as they sat on the porch, the first snowflakes of the season beginning to fall. "I've tried everything I can, but Richard's not going to change. He doesn't want to see me for who I am." John, always the steadying force, turned to face her. His eyes were kind, but there was a steel to his gaze that made her pause. "You're right," he said, his voice calm, "but you can't make him change, and you shouldn't have to." He reached for her hand, pulling her close. "You've done more than enough. We've done more than enough." Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of peace. "I've been thinking about that a lot," she said softly. "Maybe it's not about changing Richard. Maybe it's about changing how I see things. I can't control how he feels, but I can control how I respond." Gus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Exactly. And whatever happens, I'm with you. Always." As the snow began to fall heavier, blanketing Oakwood in a quiet calm, Sophia made a promise to herself. She would stop waiting for Richard's approval. She would stop putting so much weight on his opinion, on his acceptance. She would keep her heart open to Oakwood, to the people who had already accepted her, and to the family that was her rock. It was time to let go of the things that held her back. The early days of December brought a crispness to the air that seemed to sharpen everyone's senses. The streets of Oakwood were decorated for Christmas, with twinkling lights adorning every storefront and house. The town square had a towering Christmas tree, its golden star glowing brightly against the backdrop of a snow-filled evening sky. It should have been a time for joy, but for Sophia, the holidays only added weight to her internal battle. Though she had made a silent promise to herself to stop waiting for Richard's approval, the emotional pull was harder to resist than she had anticipated. Oakwood had become her home. Its people, its traditions, and its rhythms had been an integral part of her life, but no matter how much she had begun to embrace it, there was still that one thing she couldn't shake: the ongoing tension between her and Richard. For weeks, Richard had continued to maintain his distance. At first it had been subtle, a glance that didn't quite meet hers, a comment that felt more dismissive than supportive. But as the days passed, it became more apparent that he was avoiding her, avoiding any situation where they might have to interact directly. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the coldness he had created. As the town prepared for its annual Christmas gala, Sophia could feel the weight of his silence in every corner of her life. She tried to push past it, focusing on the positive aspects of her life. Her children, Amy and Liam, were thriving, and her bond with John had only grown stronger as they faced the challenges of this new life together. She had found a rhythm in Oakwood, becoming more involved in community events and even starting to help organize the local charity drive. But despite all her progress, the wound Richard had left was still there. Every time she saw him at church or at one of the town gatherings, she was reminded of the distance between them. And though she tried to convince herself that she could move on without his approval, a small part of her still hoped that one day he would see her for who she really was. It was a Friday evening. and the town hall was buzzing with preparations for the upcoming Christmas gala. Sophia had volunteered to help decorate, and as she moved about the hall, hanging garlands and setting up tables, she could feel the festive energy filling the space. There was laughter, music, and the soft murmur of voices as people worked together to make the evening magical. Yet even in the midst of it all, her mind kept drifting back to Richard. She couldn't escape the feeling that his presence, or lack of it, loomed over everything she did. He had offered no word of encouragement about the gala, nor had he acknowledged her efforts. It was as though she were invisible to him. As she adjusted a wreath on the doorframe, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she was surprised to find Evelyn standing behind her, a smile on her face but a glint of concern in her eyes. "Sophia? Dear, I know this isn't easy for you," Evelyn said, her voice warm but laced with a quiet sadness. "Richard has been struggling, and I know you feel it. But I also know you're stronger than this. You've built a beautiful life here. Don't let his silence steal that from you." Sophia paused, her fingers resting on the wreath as she processed Evelyn's words. She appreciated the sentiment, but it still didn't take away the sting. "I don't know, Evelyn. It's hard to keep giving when it feels like nothing's coming back. I try, but it seems like it doesn't matter to him." Evelyn's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "Richard isn't the easiest person to reach. He's stubborn, and he's been hurt in ways you don't know. But I think deep down he knows what you're offering. It's just going to take time. You're right. You can't make him change. But don't lose yourself in trying." Sophia's chest tightened at the words. She hadn't realized how much she had been losing herself in her efforts to win Richard's approval. She had been so consumed by the thought of what she couldn't control that she had almost forgotten the parts of herself that made Oakwood home. Her passion for the community, her bond with John, and her growing place in the town. "Thank you, Evelyn," she whispered, blinking away a tear that had unexpectedly formed. "I needed to hear that." Evelyn smiled and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Just remember, you're not alone. You're part of this community, whether Richard sees it or not." Later that night, after the decorations were finished and the hall was filled with the rich aroma of mulled wine and spiced cider, the gala finally began. The event was a celebration of the season, bringing together families, neighbors, and old friends. As the evening unfolded, Sophia found herself laughing with the other volunteers, enjoying the warmth of familiar faces and the joy of being part of something bigger than herself. But despite the festive atmosphere, Richard's absence from the gala was impossible to ignore. He hadn't attended the event, nor had he given any indication of his plans. It was as though he had deliberately distanced himself, a move that only deepened the sense of isolation Sophia had been battling for weeks. Halfway through the evening, as Sophia stood by the punch bowl, chatting with some of the other committee members, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Richard standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of months of silence hanging between them. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't speak right away. She wasn't sure what she could say that hadn't already been said through their awkward exchanges and unspoken tension. Finally, Richard broke the silence, his voice low. "Sophia, I've been avoiding you, and I need to apologize. This isn't your fault. I've been carrying a lot, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I guess, in a way, I was afraid of letting someone in again." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. The calmness in his voice was laced with an undeniable sincerity. There was no anger, no bitterness, just raw, honest vulnerability. "I'm sorry," Richard continued, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It's just been hard. I see you trying, and I see how much you've done for this town, for the people here. I don't know how to get past my own fears." Sophia felt a mixture of emotions flood her chest. Relief, confusion, and a small flicker of hope. This was the moment she had waited for, but she hadn't expected it to come in such a simple, unassuming way. Richard was being honest with her, and for the first time in a long while, she saw him, really saw him, without the walls he had built around himself. "I get it, Richard," Sophia said softly, her voice steady. We all have our reasons for being afraid. But you can't keep shutting people out, especially not people who are just trying to be there for you. Richard nodded, his lips pulling into a tight smile. I know, and I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. You are. There was a long pause between them, but this time it was comfortable. The silence was no longer filled with tension. It was simply two people standing in the glow of the holiday lights, finally acknowledging the distance that had kept them apart. Thank you, Sophia, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, for being patient with me. I'll try, I promise. Sophia smiled, feeling the weight of the past few months begin to lift from her shoulders. It wasn't an instant fix, and it wasn't a promise that things would be perfect, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in a long while, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. This video has taken us through an emotional and transformative journey, exploring the themes of forgiveness, self-worth, and the power of community. At the heart of this story, we see Sophia's resilience and her determination to build a life on her own terms, despite the challenges that arise from broken relationships and unspoken emotional burdens. The key lesson here is the importance of acknowledging our own worth and not allowing others' actions or lack thereof to define our happiness. Sophia's journey is a testament to the strength that comes from within when we choose to let go of what holds us back and embrace the possibilities of healing and growth. Moreover, the video highlights the power of communication and vulnerability in relationships. Richard's eventual admission of his own fears and regrets demonstrates that true healing comes not from silence or avoidance, but through honest dialogue and a willingness to face difficult truths. It reminds us that people often act out of their own pain, and understanding this can foster compassion and lead to stronger, more empathetic connections. The story also reinforces the importance of finding your place within a community. As Sophia integrates herself into the life of Oakwood, she learns that support and connection can come from unexpected places. Being part of something larger than oneself and giving back to that community can create a deep sense of fulfillment and belonging. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the 1 key in the comments. If you found it truly inspiring, feel free to hit the 2 key and let us know how the story resonated with you. We'd love to hear your own stories too. Please share them with us in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on more uplifting and inspiring stories coming your way. Share your thoughts, and let's continue the conversation in the comments section.